So, Skeleton Crew's out now. Now, I was considering doing a speculation video on it like I did with the other Star Wars shows, but to be honest, I don't really have any strong opinions on it. I mean, it looks fun. That's about it. So for this video, I thought I would do something different and rank previous seasons of Star Wars TV. Just for context, these are going to be fairly brief summaries of the shows and not in-depth reviews. Also, I'm only doing live action shows because I haven't really watched Bad Batch, didn't really get into it, so it wouldn't be fair if I put the animated stuff in. Also, Star Wars Visions would go at number 1.
It's beautiful!
Also, this is all 100% personal opinion. I know Star Wars fans are very passionate and opinionated, so if I say something that you don't agree with, I'm sorry, I guess? Also, spoilers ahead. Anyway, let's get started. I mean, how could I not? Well, there were some rankings on this list that were actually a lot harder to decide on than I thought. This one was a no-brainer. This season of The Mandalorian was unbelievably shit. And it's really disappointing because this show overall was really good. So to see the quality take such a nosedive is wild. It's the whole reason I'm ranking seasons and not overall shows, because this season alone just drags the previous two down. This season is just filler central. The first seasons had their filler episodes, and some were definitely better than others, but the filler was at least engaging. While here, you can feel your time being wasted. But to be fair, the main story isn't that engaging either. It doesn't really help that the setup for this season was pretty much resolved in another show. Season 2 ended in a really good way. Mando fulfills his quest to deliver Grogu to the Jedi. He also gains the Darksaber and unintentionally becomes the leader of Mandalore. It's a very emotional ending that also sets up an interesting story that the character will go through, and they just don't go anywhere with it. Episode 6 of Book of Boba Fett is good, and is pretty much what I expected this season to be like. Mando struggling to move on from Grogu, trying to understand his relationship with his clan after the events of previous seasons, and learning of the responsibilities and dangers that come with wielding the Darksaber. But he and Grogu are reunited in that show's finale, and now they're just hanging out, here for the ride while other characters take center stage. And as for the Darksaber, that storyline is confusingly given to Bo-Katan. Now, I like Bo-Katan. I think she's an interesting character, but making her become Mando's friend was, in my opinion, a huge mistake. Season 2 set her up as an antagonist for Mando, someone who really wants the Darksaber and will eventually fight him in order to claim it. It would have been a really good way of diving into how Mandalorians are their own worst enemies. Their history is riddled with infighting. It's half the reason their planet is usually depicted as a barren wasteland, from all the wars they've had with each other. All of these factions bickering over what it means to be a Mandalorian. And Mando having a fractured relationship with his clan and possessing the most important artifact in their culture could have been a great way to have this explored. But no, it's lightly touched upon in a few scenes. Bo-Katan gets the Darksaber in a weird technicality, and the Armorer makes up some bullshit for why they can be friends with Bo-Katan despite the fact she removes her helmet.
But she shows her face.
Bo-Katan walks both worlds.
See, now that's some bullshit.
Is there anything I did like? I like Carl Weathers. Mostly for how he says Mando. He says it from the gut. Always happy to hear him say a big belly Mando.
Mando! Mando. Mando! Mando! Mando!
Mando Season 3 is just a boring waste of time. It had so much potential that was just ruined. I never want to see this again. This might upset some of you. Talking about this show is kind of what got me started on YouTube. I did a speculation video on this before the show aired, and then a full review right after. So you want to know my full opinions, you can check out that video, but I'm just going to sum them up here. And look, I know this show has its fans, a lot of you made that clear, and honestly, I'm glad you like it. Like, really, I mean that. And I'm sorry that I can't see it the same way you do, but I'm sticking to my guns here. I just can't bring myself to like this show. For me, this show does not justify its own existence. nonsense and actively makes things more complicated than they need to be. Having Darth Vader and Obi-Wan actually meet between Sith and New Hope doesn't work and actively cheapens their final fight on the Death Star. Building a relationship between Obi-Wan and Leia makes no sense at all. It really should have been about his relationship with Luke. You know, the one he's actually supposed to look after, whose relationship would make sense to build on. Everyone really wanted an Obi-Wan story set between episodes 3 and 4, because we really wanted to see the transition from McGregor's Obi-Wan to Alec Guinness's betrayal in the original trilogy. And this story doesn't do that. He doesn't become original Obi-Wan. If anything, he becomes like prequel Obi-Wan again. It's just nostalgia bait. Putting on a new costume and saying, "Hello there," isn't enough. Why are you wasting our time with a story where Obi-Wan leaves his post, goes on a space adventure, and has a repeat of a fight he had years ago? It just feels like Lucasfilm saw that fans wanted an Obi-Wan story and went, "Fine, here's your fucking Obi-Wan story, now leave me alone." Also, the action in this is pretty bad. I didn't want this show to be heavily action-filled, but I figured at least the action would be good, especially from Deborah Chow, who directed some really good episodes of The Mandalorian, so the fact that it's this boring is disappointing. Now, I will say, I do like the acting in this show. Everyone is giving it their all, and yes, I mean everyone. I did like the Obi-Wan and Anakin scenes. Even I'm a sucker for this kind of nostalgia. And while I think the final fight between them is just a dull repeat of the Mustafar fight, I did like the moment where they just talk. It's a very bittersweet moment between two old friends who have both fallen from grace in different ways. But it's a real shame the rest of the show just isn't up to this standard. Overall, I do not like this show. It's just a lazy story that throws away any potential it has for a dull, generic adventure that could have been so much more. Am I a biased fanboy? Yeah, probably. You know what, I'll be a bit nice. Needed longer to cook. Much longer to cook. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking I should have ranked this show lower than Obi-Wan, and I get that, this show's pretty bad. The funny thing is, I found myself enjoying this show more than Obi-Wan, and I think that comes down to the fact that while I'm a big fan of Obi-Wan and Ewan McGregor's portrayal of Obi-Wan, I'm not really that big of a Boba Fett fan. I mean, I don't mind him, I just never really been that drawn to him the way everyone else seems to be. So, I didn't really have any set expectations for this show. To be honest, I actually liked the backstory they gave Boba Fett. Him becoming part of a Tusken tribe was honestly a good idea. This character that's been defined as a lone wolf becoming part of this bigger community is a very interesting route to take him, and I kinda wish that the show dove deeper into that, but instead they traded it in for a much duller storyline. This show gets bogged down hard by this Godfather-esque mafia turf war that would be interesting, except the writers aren't that good at writing that kind of storyline. Giving Boba Fett this kind of story is honestly the worst idea. Imagine reading stuff like this in the comics or playing stuff like this in the video games and getting this in live action. And I get why they didn't want to go down the bounty hunter route since The Mandalorian now occupies that space, but you needed something more exciting than this. If they leaned more into the Conan the Barbarian angle, with him waging a proper revenge-fueled war on the Pikes, then it would have been a lot better. If the best episodes are about storylines from other shows and don't feature the titular character, then you have a big problem. I spoke about how these episodes kinda screwed over Mando Season 3, but it also screws over Boba Fett. He only has a few seconds of screen time between these two episodes in his own show.
You're still here?
Book of Boba Fett has some interesting ideas for its main character that could have worked as a show if they decided to explore it more, but they half-assed it for a boring Godfather plotline that doesn't suit him, and the story is so unfocused and bloated that not even Boba Fett is the lead in his own show. Definitely needed longer to cook. Before we continue with the list, if you're liking the video so far, please give it a like and consider subscribing. Also bear in mind that when you do give a like, it's a bit rude to take that like away. And you're not rude, right? Anyway, here's 5th place. I was honestly a bit conflicted about where to put this one. Personally, I think these two are kind of the same level of quality because they both have similar problems in my opinion. They're shows that have an interesting premise and cool ideas, but they're not really explored and are kind of ruined by the poor writing. Now I know this one is pretty much the punching bag of a lot of Star Wars fans, and I'm betting some of you are outraged I didn't put it at the bottom, and yes, some of that is justified. This is still a bad show. The main character is so passive that sometimes I almost forgot she was in some scenes. The story is structured so badly that it's kinda hard to get invested in it. I'm not a fan of when a show dedicates an entire episode to a flashback. Even in shows I like, I'm not a fan of it. And this show does it twice, and it's of the same events. I don't care if it's from different perspectives, it really feels like a waste of time. This is meant to mark the beginning of the end for the Jedi. The seeds that would lead to the stagnant prequel-era Jedi were meant to be planted here. Except you don't really get that feeling. It seems like they're already at that stagnant stage. There's no real transition. They're not even that loved, they're always being criticized.
I think the Jedi are a massive system of unchecked power, posing as a religion. A delusional cult that claims to control the uncontrollable.
If this show actually presented the Jedi in their prime, and the events of this season sowed the seeds for their downfall, it probably would have been better. I like the idea of a Jedi conspiracy that's being brought to light, but let's face it, the events that kick off this entire show only happen because everyone involved is an idiot. Why are you suddenly turning into smoke? Why are you stabbing the smoke? This could have been easily avoided, you're all idiots! So what exactly makes this show not the worst in my opinion? Well, for starters, the action is on point. This is what gave the show an edge over Boba Fett. It's honestly some of the best lightsaber fights since the prequels. Even the hand-to-hand combat isn't too bad. Yeah, it's a bit slow and looks a little bit wiry, but I can forgive that. I actually don't mind the idea of the Witch Coven and different factions having their own interpretations of the Force. I think that's an interesting concept, even if this is too hilarious to take seriously.
The power of one. The power of two. The power of many.
A lot of fans called this the worst thing that happened to Star Wars, and really? Really? I mean, there's a lot you can criticize this show for, but fire in space and lesbian witches doesn't automatically make a show bad. Having poor character writing and story structure makes a show bad. In all honesty, I appreciate it when writers and directors come into a big franchise and try to experiment. Even if it's a big swing and a miss, I can appreciate the effort. But you know, a miss is still a miss. In the end, The Acolyte is just a show with some interesting concepts that's really bogged down by bad writing. And honestly, it really needed time to cook. Okay, now we're at the realms of bad shows, let's focus on some decent stuff. I did a speculation video on this show before it came out, and I was gonna follow it up with a proper review when it was done, but I was going through a lot of housing drama at the time that really took the wind out of my sails. I might release that review later when season 2 comes out or something, but for now I'll just sum up my opinions for this video. Firstly, I'd say this show is okay. Funny thing is though, it's not because it's consistently okay, but because the quality fluctuates dramatically. Like I would say the first 3 episodes are rubbish, the next 3 episodes are great, and the last 2 are somewhere in the middle. Characters start out pretty bad, then get interesting, and then their arcs are rushed. To be honest, my opinion of this show might just boil down to the fact that I don't particularly like Rebels. Fans of that show fucking love this one. You kinda have to watch Rebels and appreciate Rebels to properly appreciate this show, but since I don't, I can't really get into this show. And you know what, that's not really a bad thing. Not everything has to be for me, you know? I think Rosario Dawson is really good as Ahsoka. I didn't really like her at first, she was playing it kind of flat, but I think that was kind of the point. She loosens up as the show goes on. I will say I like the theme of legacy in this show, and I think it's very well explored with Ahsoka's feelings on Anakin and how it reflects on her relationship with her student Sabine. And it's also shown pretty well through the villains Baylan and Shin, who are arguably the most interesting antagonists in a Star Wars story since Darth Vader. But it still has a lot of issues that really limit it. The action is kinda bad and occasionally comical. The choreography is alright, but the editing and camera work really make it look dull. I think they only had one good fight between Ahsoka and Baylan, and that's it. Thrawn is still kinda lame, he's still doing the old, "oh, you ruined my plan, but that was my plan all along" shite that he was doing before, and the pacing is really slow, particularly at the beginning. I don't mind a slow burner, but there were some points I had to snap myself awake. And I'm not kidding, those first 3 episodes are genuinely bad. They're slow, they're boring, they're tonally all over the shop. Scenes like this are trying to emulate Kurosawa flicks like Yojimbo, but even Kurosawa would tell him to pick up the pace. Overall, Ahsoka was actually better than I was expecting, but it still falls short in a lot of areas where it needed to be better. But this show was made for fans of Rebels, and I can come to peace with that. I can now respect when I'm not the target audience for something, so I'm putting it in okay. Okay, now we're getting into the good stuff. The Mandalorian Season 2 is just good Star Wars. It's fun as hell, has great action, and has a great emotional payoff at the end of the story. I really enjoyed the finale. This is something that's been building up for 2 seasons now, and it delivers in spades. And like I said earlier, I think the setup for future stories was so good. I remember being excited to see what the consequences would be for this finale. I was very naive. A lot of people don't like this season because it leans a little too much into the extended Star Wars universe. You get characters like Bo-Katan, Ahsoka, Boba Fett showing up. I don't mind that. At least not in this season. Each episode is still interesting to watch. My personal favourite episodes are the Jedi and the Believer. I like the world building and the atmosphere in these episodes. And yeah, Mando has to share the spotlight, but he's not being kicked out of it. He's still the main character, something Season 3 forgot. I kinda like the idea that this one small character in a large universe keeps finding himself in bigger and bigger situations, as a result of trying to stick to his own moral code. There's something interesting about that, like how far can a character like that go before it eventually breaks them? Now, fans will say that the tragedy is the worst one, and this might be a bit controversial, but I actually don't mind that one. It's a daft making a toys clash episode, but it's still fun. Personally, I think the passenger is the worst one, because at least in the Boba Fett episode, stuff happens. Here, nothing really happens. It's probably the first ever episode of The Mandalorian where I felt my time being wasted. It's so boring. Why is this so boring? Oh, that's why. And yeah, while I really like the finale, I do have one gripe with it. This is gonna sound a bit nitpicky, but hear me out. I don't like that Mando and the gang are just trapped in the one room at the end. I mean, I like Luke's introduction, it's amazing to see him in his prime just mowing down enemies, but I also would have liked the main characters to be involved in the fight too, because to have them just stay in the waiting room whilst Luke takes care of everything is a tad anticlimactic. And yeah, it sounds petty as fuck to say, "Wah, I wanted Mando to fight the bad guys." I don't know, I just think it would have made the whole thing a bit better. Just having him wait there feels a bit boring. Why is that boring? Oh, right. But honestly, this doesn't really take away from the emotional weight of this finale, or the fun I had watching this season overall. Mando Season 2 is fun, intense, and overall, just a good time. Good Star Wars. Andor is so fucking good, mate. And a lot of shows on this list, a lot of them tend to struggle balancing the storylines between the main and supporting characters, while Andor doesn't have that issue. There's room for everyone to breathe. The show balances everyone's storylines perfectly. We see what each character wants out of life, what they're willing to do to get it, and how they try to live with that. The season split into 4 arcs with 3 episodes for each, and with each one building on top of the other and enriching the story as it goes. My personal favourite is the prison arc. I think that's where the Empire's cruelty is really on display, and the payoff of the breakout is also satisfying and bittersweet. It's so good. I don't think we really had this level of moral complexity in Star Wars since the Clone Wars animated show. This show does a lot to flesh out a character that fans really didn't care about in Rogue One and show how someone slowly becomes radicalized into taking on an oppressive government. The Empire is probably the most terrifying they've ever been since Empire Strikes Back. While they're usually depicted as cartoony villains in other shows, here they seem like a genuine threat. You see how they use soft power and microaggressions to destroy communities. There's a sinister method and nuance to their cruelty. This is how an oppressive dictatorship would operate. There's only one guy who's cartoonishly evil and he gets punished for it. And this oppression is also shown very well through Mon Mothma. Scenes with her are always so tense. It feels like she's never safe. Even when she's having dinner with her family, it seems that she has to keep looking over her shoulder. And I like that they show the morally grey elements of starting a rebellion. While other shows tend to say that it just takes good morals to stand up for what you believe in, this show challenges that, and I really like the juxtaposition of her character with Luthen, a character who's just too far gone into the morally grey that he sees no way out. And I especially love his speech here.
I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see.
It's so good. If I'm going to criticize this show over anything, it's that it's a little too afraid to be Star Wars. And that sounds like a weird thing to say, but if you notice, you don't really see a lot of alien species. Just about all of the characters are human. It doesn't really ruin the story, but the aliens are kind of a big draw for Star Wars. So to not include them feels a bit strange, although it looks like this issue will be addressed in Season 2, so that's good. Andor is such a radical departure from other Star Wars shows, and it's all the better for it. It takes the universe and its characters seriously, and I'm so happy it did. Thing of beauty. Can't wait for Season 2. I was really struggling on whether this or Andor should be at number 1, but I ultimately decided that The Mandalorian Season 1 should definitely get a top spot, which is weird because these two are very different stories. I love the intricate political thriller storytelling of Andor, but I also love the straightforward episodic western style of The Mandalorian. Very opposite shows that are just so good at what they do, but what gave this show an edge over Andor for me was that it just felt like classic Star Wars. Mando himself is just a really cool character. Is he just Boba Fett with a paint job? A little bit, but I think he separates himself enough to be unique. He's part of a much larger community and follows that community's way of life to the letter. As much as I enjoy a chaotic neutral character like Andor, I also enjoy watching morally rigid characters like Mando. Like I said earlier, it's interesting to see how this code of honor that he follows puts him in more and more difficult situations, and I especially like the episodes where it's tested, and the person who tests it the most is Grogu. I know he's been oversaturated to death at this point, but I remember when Grogu first appeared and no one could get enough of this little bastard. Hell, he was big in the UK and we didn't even have Disney Plus at this point. And Grogu is a great character to help us get invested in the story. We recognize that he looks like Yoda, a character that we know and love, except he's a baby. Okay. Now we're intrigued. Where does this kid come from? And why does the Empire want him so badly? And I know the lone wolf and cub trope isn't exactly original, but I think it works really well here. Besides one scene in the finale, we never get to see Mando's face, and his relationship with Grogu helps us connect with him better. There's a reason he never takes off his armor. It's a protective shell that stops him from letting anyone in, and Grogu challenges that notion. Plus it helps that he's bloody adorable. Now in terms of episodes, unlike the following seasons, I don't think this season has any bad episodes. It definitely has episodes that aren't as strong as others, and it does take a couple episodes to properly get going, but I was never bored with the story. This is the most focused and engaging season of The Mandalorian, and in my opinion, best season of live action television that Star Wars has ever produced. Thing of beauty. And that's my ranking of the live-action Star Wars shows. I know a lot of people will disagree with some of my rankings, and that's understandable, we all like different things, but let me know what you thought in the comments and how you'd rank these seasons. If you want me to further elaborate on anything in a later video, let me know. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and subscribe for more content. Have a good day.